All right. Today is January 18th, 2023. My name is Dr. Jason Higgins, and joining me remotely for an oral history interview is Ari Merretazon, and he is currently in Wyncote, Pennsylvania. I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia. And this is the third interview documenting the really remarkable life story of Ari. Ari is a Vietnam veteran, a formerly incarcerated veteran, an activist for racial justice, criminal justice reform, for veterans, for reparations,
Reparations.
all of the above. He is a very notable man in history. His story has been documented in Wallace Terry's Bloods, an oral history of African American Vietnam veterans. The film Dead Presidents is loosely based on your life experiences. It's a little fictional, but maybe we can talk about that today.
What was that? The last
Dead
part?
Presidents.
Oh, yeah. You talk about anything you like to talk about, I answer.
All right. So before I get started, I just want to make sure that I have your permission to record the interview.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All
You
right.
do have my permission.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Last time we talked, you had recounted your time from coming home in Vietnam, your work organizing incarcerated veterans, and then testifying before Congress in 1979. And I want to pick up at that moment because you mentioned that you had gotten involved with the Vietnam Veterans of America.
Yeah.
I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, they were organized around the same time as your testimony to Congress, around
Absolutely.
1979, 1978. And then they really launched a lot of programs in the early 1980s. They were advocating for, disability rights to veterans, the recognition of PTSD. And most people don't know that they had actually started a program working with incarcerated veterans. And I didn't realize until you mentioned in our interview last time that you were involved in that.
Yeah.
Could
In
you?
fact, when I was released, they gave me office space there uh, until I was able to, do some grant proposals and set up the office as an independent incarcerated veteran assistance organization outside of prison.
So could you talk about that, your work with the VVA? How did you first get started? Who was involved in the incarcerated veterans work?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You asking for some names, but I'm not. If they flow in me, flow. I definitely share the names. But it
All right.
all started with upon my release. Of course, I went back before the judge. Judge said, "Hey, look, after these 5.5 years, prison can't do anything for you anymore. You already topped out, and I'm gonna release you." And he reduced my sentence to 6 to 30 years. I had already served 5.5. So 2 weeks later, after going back and receiving my time cut, I was back in Washington D.C., which was a little quick for most things to happen that way. But I was back there in 2 weeks. I enrolled in the, I think I enrolled in the Antioch School of Law, exactly, legal technician program, and graduated with distinction, and end up working for and with the deans of the school, Gene and Edgar Kahn. In that role. I was special assistant to the deans, and my role was to actually be the assistant to uh, the management of the law school. The legal side of the law school, where they're provide legal services to the poor. And so I was assistant to the manager of the law school. And that went well. I taught one of the courses I taught, or the course that I taught there as representing the school, was Introduction to Professional Methods. First year law students, how to actually engage in a process of serving the poor, providing legal service to the poor. It was all a mindset of understanding who your clients are and the environment that they're in and where all the legal issue arises from. And so you're at the same time you're dealing with those individual issues, legalities, problems that they have. You also have to deal with that community as well, because you can't separate the two. And so that went well. That was a very popular course. First orientation of law students at Antioch School of Law from 76, 78 to 2000. Because it was 2000 when I left to go to Little Rock.
Was it 2000 or was it in the 1990s? I thought
Well, let's see.
maybe maybe I'm misunderstanding that.
Yeah. So got in prison, but 76, Antioch School of Law, 78. Graduated from there in 80, and I went to Little Rock, Arkansas in 1980. And David Levine, let me mention his name. David Levine was the manager of the law firm, and I was his assistant. And we was all part of the dean's staff.
So we didn't really. I'm curious. Did you have a college education at that point?
No, let me tell you about that. That's the story, man. All right, so my education at that time, prior to Antioch School of Law, was high school education, a C student. And of course, I did all my studies and whatnot in prison and advanced myself. And I enrolled into the legal technician program at Antioch School of Law. All right, successfully achieved that program, ended up working for the deans. And then, a part of that training, Antioch and I think Hillary Clinton was part of the Legal Service Corporation at the time. She was the chairman of the board at that time, Hillary Clinton. And so we pulled a team of us, including Michael Swack, M. Tongalisi Sanyika, Abdul Rashid, and myself. These 14, we developed this thing called the Community Economic Development Training. And that we was, and the Antioch School of Law was very supportive of it. They connected with the Economic Development Law Center in Berkeley, California. So they partnered up, and we basically carried out the work of providing training communities in the science of community economic development. All right, so once we did that, we, with Michael Swack out of Manchester, New Hampshire, he was with Manchester College at Southern New Hampshire College at the time. And he presented the program, all the trainings that we have done to the deans of that school, and they accepted it as a master's degree course in the science of community economic development. And guess who was one of the first ones to enroll in there? I enrolled in the course, right? So I have a high school education, no bachelor degree, but I have a master's degree in the science of community economic development because I was one of the initial forerunners, the creators of the science, you know? And so I enrolled in the course, and like just as anyone, I applied to be a student in the master's degree program like every other student did, and I completed that course, and I have a master's degree in the science of community economic development. So I'm a creator and a participant in my own training. That's great. That's a very interesting dynamic for me. I really appreciate people recognizing my inherent capacities of being able to analyze and to conceptualize and process what I see to be true.
Well, experience is one of the best educators in my opinion.
Oh yes, sir. I claim that.
Right on.
And so we did training all across the United States, you know. And then from that training, we put that in a proposal to New Hampshire College, Southern New Hampshire College, and they accepted the program as a master's degree program. And it became then we added the international arm. And so we had international CED master's degree program and a national CED program.
How did that relate to your work? And as I understand it, you were actually part of the teams that were trying to document information on incarcerated veterans in America after your release. This is the information that was presented before Congress.
Yes.
That there were so many veterans currently incarcerated, a significant number didn't have disability benefits. How did you get involved in that after your release from prison?
Okay, well, I had set up the Incarcerated Veteran Assistance Organization as a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, a veteran service organization. And from there, I wrote grants to the Washington, D.C., the D.C. government, and it was granted. I set up the office in my basement of my home and ran the Incarcerated Veteran Assistance Organization out of my home. I had 3 employees. And I did that until 1984. and that's when I went to Little Rock to set up the not the Vietnam Vet Center, but to set up 84 to revitalize the Arkansas State Press newspaper that hadn't published in 24 years. It was the only black newspaper in the state, and the owners were members of the NAACP. The publisher at the time was the Daisy Bates, and L.C. Bates. Daisy Bates, the wife of L.C. Bates, was she's a former national chairman of the NAACP. And so she received all the recognition of that position and all the things that she contributed. She was the person that helped coordinate the desegregation of Little Rock Central High School. The Little Rock Nine was her group, and that she facilitated them to engage the school and the state in respect to desegregating Central High School. And Orville Forbes was the governor at the time, and he and Daisy Bates, they was they were adversaries at one point. Then it evolved. Once we got the job done, and I revitalized the newspaper, I brought both of those personalities back together. Former Governor Orvis Forbes and Daisy Bates in a nice big birthday celebration for her. And so, as an effort to try and keep that experience in that those events in the public domain, and also just move the process along and give honor to.
You've been in the background of history this whole time.
Yeah, there's a Jet magazine article that came out in 1984 where I revitalized the Arkansas State Press newspaper. There was a picture of myself and Daisy Bates on the front, holding up a picture. We covered, I think we covered Bill Clinton at that time on the front page, right? And I think he and Jesse Jackson that came into town, and we covered that story.
I'm gonna have to look up that image.
Yeah, I think I have that image. It's one of my pictures. I have it on my phone. And on my Facebook page. So, as I run across it, I send it to you.
So, how long did you work with that newspaper?
From 1984 to 1989, 5 years. I revitalized the newspaper. We sold it because Daisy Bates' health was turning down, was getting bad, and we decided to sell the newspaper. She did. She was a decision maker, and we sold the newspaper. I went and enrolled into the master's degree program in the science of community economic development at Southern New Hampshire University, and that's the program that I helped develop and put on and rolled out and designed scientifically. And so I went on and enrolled and received my master's degree, and that's where I am right now.
That was after your time working with the newspaper?
You enrolled? Right. The newspapers might look at 84 to 89. Because 89 was when I enrolled in the master's degree program in the science of community economic development at New Hampshire College. And then the further development of that program turned into a school of community economic development at Southern New Hampshire University. And that was manned by Dr. Michael Swack.
So talk about your experiences and your time in Little Rock, Arkansas. Were you also involved with veterans and education at that time?
Yes, absolutely. Because I went to Little Rock initially in 1987 to the Vietnam Vet Center, right? And so with announcing the opening of the vet center, all the veterans came out of the neighborhoods, and trying to get help that they thought that they knew they didn't have opportunity to receive. And so we had a nice clientele there in Little Rock. And of course, we served the central part of the state. But any veterans could come to Little Rock, to the vet center, and receive services. All that person had to do was be a resident of the state of Arkansas.
And what was that like for you working with the vet center?
It was rough, man. It was rough because the first 90 days were very, very rough because I had a team leader who happened to be a psychiatrist. That's all he did while he was in the Army. And no frontline, I didn't see any real understanding of appreciation for combat soldiers, but nevertheless, he looked at them as dependents as opposed to we all being veterans and helping each other, right? And so I made my name serving veterans in prison, incarcerated veterans. And so I went there with the expectations that I could continue to work with veterans in prison. He would not allow me to do it. And we struggled. He refused to allow me to go into the prisons and assist veterans, in which I had made a very significant name and reputation and of doing, and brought the whole issue of incarcerated veterans to the national spotlight. He refused to allow me to, to deal with veterans in prison. And so that didn't go too well. So I ended up, we challenged that, and he terminated me. And I subsequently engaged some legal matters, and we settled that matter. But then I went over to legal services again, back to legal services. But yeah, that experience at the vet center was weird with the team leader. I think Luther Johnson. I never forget his name was Dr. Luther Johnson. His off. Go ahead.
When you said legal services, are you talking about the VVA legal services, or are you talking about something else? The Vietnam Veterans of America.
Legal service. I'm talking about working for a legal service corporation called Central Arkansas Legal Services. It was part of the national network of legal service organizations that was going on around the country. And so after I was fired from the VA, the director of the Central Arkansas Legal Services heard about it. He saw it as an opportunity for me to bring me on his staff. And so I came part of his staff as a legal technician, And let's see, that be okay. So that happened.
What was the nature of your work with the legal services in Arkansas? What were you doing?
Providing legal services to the poor, housing services, administrative legal services was the primary my role. I was handling all the administrative issues with various agencies in the state, and then once I develop the case to a level where the lawyers can come in and take over, then that's what I did.
What was your impression of Arkansas after living in D.C.?
It was adventurous. I knew it was going to be an adventure for me, and that's what I wanted. I still had that in my system, and I had an opportunity to stay in D.C., work in Philadelphia, work in New York, work in Baltimore, Atlanta. I had all those major cities. I told I'm going to Little Rock, Arkansas. That's where the brothers are. That's where the folks who need the help the most. In my own mind, I said that, and I went. I decided, no, I take the job in Little Rock. So I went on down.
And do you feel like you were able to make an impact
through
that work?
I did. I'm sure I did. I'm sure I did. Veterans did now, even today, understand how I was able to assist them where there was no assistance available before. You see? And so I had to deal with the quality of the assistance I was provided. I filled the gap, provided some quality assistance, and wanted to also provide that same quality to veterans in prison. And that's when I got into the fight with the team leader. And so he knew he had the advantage of me because I was still within my 90-day period, right, probationary period. And so he decided to just let me go, kick me out the door.
Do you think that was like a racial conflict or something that he held?
Exactly. That's the context of his behavior, And but when I was fired, and I was kind of like quasi-public with my work with veterans in Little Rock, as I said, legal services, because I had worked with some of those lawyers before, because at least two of them were professors at Antioch School of Law at that time. And so they grabbed me pretty quickly. There was no real interval in my being unemployed. And then I worked there for Central Arkansas Legal Services, assisting veterans and any other housing problems, agency problems, welfare issues, representing people before administrative agencies, that type of thing, where a lawyer is not required.
Have you ever been back to prisons to work directly with veterans since that time?
Here in the state of Pennsylvania, I've graded for it. I set up, while out of prison, set up and living in Philadelphia through a contact of, what's the woman's name? Her name flows past me. Well, anyway, she was always working with veterans, and she realized she met me, and then she asked me what I do that for. So I went on and engaged in the veterans up there in Graterford, and the program still exists today. And a couple of years back, I went up to visit the brothers, made a little presentation, check in on everybody, and see what else I could do. The administration did see it as a feather in their cap, but they give due credit to the veterans for doing that self-help work.
Going back to Arkansas briefly, I understand that you were involved with the school board. Can you talk about that? Where you were running for school board?
Yeah, that was interesting. Well, at the time, there was a long-standing school board member. Seemed like every time she might have been served at least 3 or 4 terms at school board at Little Rock. So I decided, hey, look, ain't nothing changing. I'm gonna put myself in there, and I did. And then you know how the politics go. They just threw me out there in Front Street, twisted my story, presented me as an ex-offender, this and all this type of stuff, and you know, and so I lost that particular election. But they did the real dirty thing. They really dirtied my name, threw me out there, made all types of allegations, and just the fact that I was happened to be an ex-prisoner. That was it, really. That's because Arkansas, they couldn't understand that even occurring, I guess. But that's what they put out there. And then after that, guess what? I applied for a position at the state as the director of the Ethics Commission, right? And got an interview, right? And got an interview, and a big editorial came out in the Arkansas State in the Arkansas Gazette called Ari the Chutzpah Champ.
What does that mean?
Ari Chutzpah Champ. Chutzpah is a term, is a Jewish term for having, how dare he, or having great nerve, the nerve of a person, have such much nerve to do something like that, to run for a statewide office as an ex-offender. They called me the Chutzpah Champ for doing so. And the statewide office was the Ethics Commission. I caught the announcement that there was a vacancy. I met all the criteria for applying, and I applied. And the newspaper, made a big thing about it, and they dragged me through the mud, my ex-offender status and all that. That's all they could do to deal with the ex-offender stuff, and that I was still on parole. I think I was still on parole at that time. Yeah, I was still on parole, and I don't think, what they raised the issue that a parolee could not run for any elected office, But I didn't know. I didn't care, to tell you the truth. I just ran. I knew I was competitive at the Ethics Commission as the director of the Ethics Commission, but they just thought it was pretty funny.
Well, it sounds like you've affected greater change outside the political
Oh yeah, we did.
office.
It was an engagement. It was an engagement. It was a discussion in the public domain about it. You might can find some information about that article, that editorial, the newspaper editorial, about calling me the Chutzpah Champ. The nerve of him.
So one thing we haven't really talked about in all of these interviews is really your relationships with people, and we can talk about family,
Yeah,
children.
let's start right there. I like to start from family and move out.
All right.
So in 1980, when I went to Little Rock, I was in a common law marriage, and we went down to Little Rock. She relocated with me, and then Little Rock was something. My mission was a little different from what the mission that she thought she would be on, but she ended up working for some of the news media. She was a graduate from Howard University, and then she all of a sudden disappeared for about 4 months, just went left. And when she came back, I'm not calling names because the record has all that. And when she came back, I decided I was going to leave. I said, look, you can have the house. My name was on the house. I said, I'm not going to struggle with you. You got the house, but I got to go. I can't stay here with you, right? And no, I took her name off, and I sold the house. That's how that went. And I left. And so she stayed there and worked for a TV station, radio station, stuff like that. But I left and went on to back to D.C.
So was that your only marriage?
No, my last marriage ended in an agreeable mutual of separation and divorce. That's to Rose Ann Merretazon in Little Rock, Arkansas. I think she got a little homesick because I relocated back to Philadelphia. She's a native of Little Rock. She's a Kansan. Her mother was a little under the weather from time to time, and so she missed her mother and whatnot. And although she ended up working for the city government here, but her pull was to go back and take care of her mom. I just told her I just couldn't go. I had some other commitments I had to deal with my own son in terms of his condition of being a kidney in need of a kidney and into that situation. So in
What's your
'97,
son's name?
Malcolm Graham,
And
and
when was he born?
1983.
And this was a son with your first marriage?
Yes,
Or no? Oh, okay.
yes.
Okay. And he was still a young child whenever he
Well,
needed the
13 when we
kidney.
did the transplant. He was 13.
How did
He
he
was,
receive the kidney transplant? Was that from you?
yeah, it was for me. And I was, I wouldn't have allowed anybody else to do it. Initially, he was enrolled in school with me in Little Rock. I had living with me in Little Rock. He went home, and the doctor took him off some medicine he had on. And next thing I knew, he called me and said, "Hey, can you get here? Your son is in critical condition. He may not survive it." And so I jumped on a Greyhound bus about 11 o'clock at night because I got the call late. And the only thing I could afford was a Greyhound bus at the time to deal with it immediately. And so I jumped on, took that long ride on a Greyhound bus from Little Rock, Arkansas to Philadelphia. And man, talk about all the things that was going through my head at the time, my heart pounding. And when I get to Philadelphia, the next day I come to the hospital, go to his room, and he was laying in the bed. Said he probably won't be able to answer you. That's okay. So let me try it. I called his name. On the third time, I said, "Son, if you hear me, put your thumb up." And he did. They said he had made no type of communications in about a week or so, And so that was a heavy bond for me. I stayed there for about 7 days, and I went back to Little Rock. And then I tried to find a way to get back to the East Coast to be near him. So I put all of my employment information, resumes out there into the world, and I heard about a position in Philadelphia with the Salvation Army as director of their foundation relations. So I applied for the position, came up for the interview. They hired me on the spot. I just considered it was nothing but God because, my son was in Philadelphia, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where we did the transplant. And so all that was just positive, solid connection to close that gap of not being away from him, And so I was successful in doing that. So I worked for them for about 2 years. And let's see, from there, you have my resume chronology. So if you kick them out to me chronologically, I can speak to them. It's hard for me to put them in that chronological order because I don't have it in front of me. And so if not tonight, maybe the next interview, finalized interview.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious about is this around the same time as your near death experience? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I had, as that summer, it was that time for me to keep both of the children, Malcolm and Malika. So they kept them that summer. Malcolm was already enrolled in school. Malika would just come down and visit me with her dad and her brother. And so I was taking, and at the end of that, and at the end of the summer, the thing was to put them both on a plane and send them both back to D.C. So Malcolm be up there with his mom, and then I'll come up and get him and drive him back. And so after I dropped them off at the airport, I was going back up 40 West. I was driving 40 West. I can't recall the mile marker. I think maybe something like 18 or 118, something like that. But anyhow, the left lane was closing down with some barrels, and there was two 18-wheelers convoying in the left lane, the fast lane, and so they came upon that they were expecting me to get over for some reason, but there was only one lane left, right? And I guess they couldn't stop as quick as they want to, so they moved over. They missed the barrier and knocked me off the road, and I was in a coma for about 30 days. I know I was in a coma for 7 days, lost my complete memory for 30 days. I didn't know this person. I was looking in the mirror. And then it took me about 2.5, 3 years to recover fully to the point where I can feel comfortable that I have made some recovery. But in the interim of that, I think that's 60 days in and out the hospital, when I finally released me, I went back to work. I just figured out the only way I can, deal with my recall is to actually do something, start working. So I made contact with 2 foundations that I was used as a consultant for. I was working as a consultant in evaluating programs that they gave money to in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. Levi Strauss Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation, those are 2. Freeman McKendry and Hendry, I'm not going to go trying to get the other brother's name wrong right now, but Freeman McKendry at the Rockefeller Foundation. And so I went and did my work. What I decided, I knew I couldn't remember anything in the interview, so I took me a recorder, recorded everything, came back to the room, typed out the report, that type of thing. But I was very leery of going to, they wanted to send me to a brain injury place in Texas, Arcana, Texas. And I said, man, I don't know anybody there. I'm not going. Send me to the VA hospital in Little Rock. Because I had set up a chapter of American Legion post in Little Rock. So all the veterans there knew me. So just soon as I entered the hospital, the VA hospital in Little Rock, one of the nurses knew me because she was the wife of one of the veterans. She said, Ari. And man, that turned my life right like I wanted to. People recognized me. The first thing I said, wait, how did we know each other? How do you know me? And that was how I would engage them. Everything began to come back in every situation. Now I went home and stayed with my family for about 3 weeks. My mom and my dad, and asked them all questions about the family and whatnot. Hung around with my sisters, talk about the nephews and nieces that I used to help out with. And so it began to gradually come back. And I learned that I'm good, that all I need is a recording. I can still do what I want to do. But I couldn't recall a conversation after 5 minutes. Like we're holding a conversation now, I couldn't recall anything that we talked about within 5 minutes. It would just go, it just wouldn't be there anymore. And so I captured everything on the recorder,
Are there long-term effects to your traumatic brain injury that you still experience today?
Oh, yeah, still some residual, but they're probably like residual like the average person, in terms of recall, immediate recall, stuff like that. Other than that, no. I'm fully, I consider myself fully recovered, and I've engaged the marketplace, engaged the workplace, not a problem at all.
Did you ever go back and read your oral history and bloods to try to help you remember?
I did just that. It was very good. And then that's the key thing. All I had to need was people who knew me, and they can give me the prompts of how we met and what the relationship was. And once they started that, it all began to come back. And I think I'm fully clothed now, I think. Except for some real minor stuff.
Well, so just to try to keep the story in order here, as I understand it, you moved away from Little Rock to take a job to be closer to your son.
Yes, for Salvation Army. I ended up being the director of foundation relations for the Salvation Army of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Southern New Jersey, and Delaware.
And you've been in the Philadelphia area since then?
Yes.
Okay. Do you still have a relationship with your children?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we hit the road kind of like every year, get on a nice road trip, and so we travel a lot together. My son stayed with me for the last year and a half. He just got back on his feet because he had to get another kidney transplant. During his convalescence, he was with me, and so I'm always there, and that was good. And he's back on his feet. He's working. And we feel the comeback kid has done it again. I call him the real comeback kid because at that time, President Clinton was calling President Clinton the comeback kid. I said, no, this is the real comeback kid right here, and so That's my name for him.
What does he do? Is he involved
Malcolm's
in
a photographer, and he's involved now with this cannabis industry. I think he works for some cannabis company, something we're outside the county, outside of Philadelphia. And I think it was in Montgomery County. I don't know to the extent. All I know is that he's there. He's an employee there. He helps them with the what is that? The total operations of the place.
and what about your daughter?
Malika's an attorney. She's a graduate from George Washington Law School, right? And she now works for NASA. And she's she's a procurement attorney for NASA, and she handles all the procurement for the Mars project that they have going on. And she's the founder and first president of the African American Advisory Commission for NASA. And she invited me, her dad, to be the keynote speaker for the first event, which was Juneteenth, 2020, I think it was. Yeah, and I don't think I disappointed her, but I left my last statement was say, look, and I know I might have said some things that many of you don't agree with, but don't hold it against my daughter, my daughter attorney Malika Graham. And I ended it that way, and it was real nice. And I posted up on I can send it to you if you'd like to take a look at it. But the response was 600 federal employees. The day before Juneteenth became law, or the weekend. We did it on a Saturday, and that Monday, I think it was, Juneteenth became official national holiday.
I'm just amazed by how your story often comes full circle from, the depths of prison to testifying before Congress to meeting presidents and to speaking at NASA. It's quite a remarkable journey.
Well, hey, look, I just appreciate, I do what I do, and it's a very intuitive, intrinsic sort of understanding about the world. And I'm a good, I'm a good analyst, and I can learn quickly. I'm pretty much self-taught, and I just appreciate the acknowledgement that my son and daughter give me all the time. We on the road a lot. Every summer, we doing something on the road. So I look forward to upcoming summer, and I don't know what I might think we're gonna try and do the round trip to California and back. And I think that's what that's the last thing. I think that's what we want to do. So we're gonna try and do it this summer. It's gonna be real fun.
Do you think that your own experiences has inspired your daughter to pursue law?
I think so, because I know so. In fact, and I helped her. She would always rely on me on some issues that she had to deal with in law school and cases that she had to analyze and stuff like that. And she always ran this little stuff past me. Not everything, but things that she felt that I could have helped with. So she always used me as a resource in her legal education, and so much so, the first time as the first founding president of NASA's African American Advisory Committee, who did she choose to do the presentation? Her dad. And man, that knocked me out of my shoes, man. I just floated all around the rocks. Unbelievable. I said, look at Malika, giving it back,
So, we haven't had a chance to talk about a lot of the other areas of your work and your activism and beyond incarcerated veterans and veterans
Yeah.
issues.
I want to talk about reparations, man, because I'm committed to that. And I first got into reparations, really digested and committed to it in 2005 when I first joined the Philadelphia chapter of Incobra. And since that time, I've ended up being a national co-chair, regional representative, and those types of things. And then what had happened was, as the saying goes, in 2021, Incobra decided to receive a grant from the a grant from the MacArthur Foundation as a pass-through for another organization called the IBW 21st Century Group, headed by Dr. Ron Daniels. And but one of the conditions of that grant was that Incoba could no longer lobby Congress or state legislators for reparations. And that's the reason why it would remain as an independent nonprofit organization, so that it could do just that. Because how can you command Congress and other state legislators to do anything unless you actually have the capacity to lobby? So they took away they nullified the capacity to lobby of Incoba, IBW 21st Century, founder and president Ron Daniels, nullified Incoba, a 32-year-old organization, from lobbying Congress for reparations for what about, maybe I think the total grant, multi-year grant, was maybe about $4.7 million. So it hit me in the heart, man, and I'm not finished with them yet. They're going to have to do some transparency. They're going to have to show the process, and be accountable for what they've done. They've actually turned the national organization into a program. All right? I don't know if I sent you the outline about all that lays out the chronology of my engaging on this question. But back then, I think it was Catherine MacArthur Foundation grant for $1.5 million to build the capacity and power of Black communities in the United States globally to work culturally, socially, economically, and politically upliftment, including support for the National African American Reparations Commission. That's a group called NARC. Without NARC and IBW 21st, they were the same. They used Incoba because Incoba was a long-standing reparations organization, had a lot of strong relationship with Congress, with the lead person who actually put forth and was the author of H.R. 40. And so it was a lot of hanky-panky went down, and I didn't like it, and I'm still on it. I'm going to make them pay. I already filed a complaint against IBW 21st Century, Ron Daniels, Cam Howard, and a couple of the executive committee members of Incoba. And what they've done is just took away the voice of a national organization, the ability and power to lobby Congress. And Congress is the only one, right? Legislators are the only ones that can actually make sure or grant reparations, under the law. And so nullifying Incoba, it just nullifies the whole reparation movement in my own mind here in the United States.
So there's a lot of competing visions for what reparations actually looks like. Can you talk about what reparations actually means? Like how and what form would a reparation take, and like how do you communicate that to a broad public?
Well, we are communicating through the Philadelphia chapter of Incoba. IncobaPHL.org is our website. And what we do, we try to engage, first educate the people who in fact was enslaved, and to identify them as a group, because it's a group, the missing element, the missing legal piece of lawsuits going before courts is that they could never identify a critical group. And through the work of attorney Vernellia Randall, and she used the concept, she was working with the concept of descendants of African slaves in the United States as an indicator for the census, as an identifier for the census. And I saw that, and I knew the issue was for reparations was that you had to identify the group. And so I used that concept, that identifier, as the group of people, of people who demands and commands reparation. That is, they are descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States. And we can record that. We can put that on the record. We can find those people. We have all the records. But again, because of the conspiracy to nullify the organization, we are not yet back at that point when the national organization can actually engage in lobbying to the extent that it has the benefits and reach the goal that we are commanding.
And so I guess what I'm curious about is, does your organization's efforts for reparations include like direct financial compensation? Does it include
Sure, includes all that.
infrastructure?
Includes all that. Economics, economics, education, housing, peoplehood is the critical one. You familiar with the Kute Kinte Roots, right? Movie. And I always example the whipping of Kute Kinte out of out of turning Kute Kinte into quote unquote Toby. And see, that's what happened to us. They took our peoplehood. Our people has been taken, destroyed. And so part of the reparation must go back to repairing the peoplehood. And you can do that repair through education, economics, health, housing, and all those basic issues that we experience daily, you know. But you first got to recognize who you are. And I come to find myself, and not as a substitute for any other African Americans or black or whatever the case may be, but as for reparations purposes, I am and we are descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States. We African Americans and blacks here now in the United States, we are descendants of those who were enslaved. So we can identify the people. It's just the people have to step forward and say, yeah, and be willing to make the case and willing to use the power of the people to advance the reparations movement here in the United States. But there's a lot of things going on right now that is nullifying that. And it's just politics of organizations, which I'm going to stay on and work out and engage and try and be as transparent to the public as possible to see exactly what's going on with the reparation movement in the United States and what happened to this premier organization, 32-year organization called Cobra. How did it become a program of another organization?
I'm curious about the difference between reconciliation and reparation. Can you talk a little bit about how you think people can honestly have a hard conversation about the past and what it means to reconcile between white supremacy and racial inequality in American history?
But of course, there has to be a willingness to reconcile. Reconciliation is first step. That is, you make your amends, you make your admissions of wrong, of what you did and what have you, and then we sit down and negotiate what the reparations would look like out of that. Because now we both are in agreement that reparations are due to the enslaved descendants of Africans in the United States. So we both agree with that. We admit that we had a major role, the United States had a major role in that. And so now is to negotiate the deal. It must be negotiated. It cannot be a grant program. Because if that was the case, then the issue of reparations could have long been solved. Right? It's about rebuilding people, your peoplehood, who you are. You know, it took me out of my culture, right? My father's father's father and my mother's mother's mother out of the culture of Africanness. And it did it in a very so-called legal and illegal ways, according to their law. And I'm not saying that what they consider legal is not illegal or not a violation of human rights, but it is, because it's legal, it's a violation of human rights, you know, and they're doing it. And so we're right now on the comeback of rebuilding the capacity, the organizational capacity of black people here in the United States, descendants of Africans in the United States, to engage in and command reparations from the various legislators, from Congress and other states here in the United States.
So speaking of getting back in touch with your culture, could you tell me about the images in the background on your wall? I wanted to ask, from the first interview.
This symbol here is a Ghanaian symbol image of deal with fertility. Okay, it's a symbol of fertility. At the top is well, let me deal with the Ankh to my life, which means love and life, is representative of the creation of the world. right? Come through that concept, and you see that the cross is a derivation of the ankh. And here's to the right is the symbol of ma'at, which is a concept of truth and justice, a balancing of life before the scales of God, and this represented by the hawk, a haru, and the two ankhs in each on each side of it. And so we're talking about truth and justice and life, and that's what if those two things were present during the time of Europeans were trying to find their way, then there wouldn't have been. There would have been acknowledgement, appreciation, and respect for African people as opposed to the enslavement thereof, you know? And so these are all motivating symbols, very spiritual symbols for me to maintain my direction, maintain my courage, maintain my perspective in life. And I basically it's almost just like the concentric. I see it as the concentric order of Ma'at, M-A-A-T, which means basically a balance of all things good and true.
Well, Ari, I'm at the point of our interviews where most of the questions I had have been answered, and I'm curious. Are there things that you wanted to talk about that I haven't thought to ask? Anything that you wanted to go back to, or something
Yeah,
that you
and I
wanted to
wanted to go
raise?
back to the plight, the 10-year struggle we had with veterans here in the city of Philadelphia. And when I was looking for my war buddy Bobby Williams, who was in the same squad with me from Philadelphia, I couldn't find him. And according to the law, the city of Philadelphia, the county of Philadelphia, should have had was required to have a veteran grave registration record where you can find the names of all veterans who had passed, who had died, and the funeral home and churches that they were to make been funeralized at. And come to find out, Philadelphia never had one, and the law was on the book since 1939. Yeah, whoa, it's a major piece, man. And so we engaged them. When I say we, I'm talking about Point Man Soldiers Heart Ministry, where James Abram was the founding president, and I served as his chief of staff. And we engaged the city of Philadelphia based on the history we became aware of, that Philadelphia is the only county out of 67 counties without, never had a Office of Veterans Affairs or a Director of Veterans Affairs. And so, the politics of the city, they fought it as opposed, instead of just, okay, our predecessors didn't do anything with the law, we're going to do something with it now that you brought it to our attention. And we was able to get a public hearing on that, and we testified to the fact that the city was not practicing the law as required in respect to Veterans Affairs. First thing, having a Veterans Affairs office, having a Director of Veterans Affairs, they never was one of those types. It was just they just had a Veterans Advisory Commission, nothing but politics. Because at some point during the veterans holidays, the city would be very embarrassed not to have anything in place for veterans. So they set up the president, Darrell Clark, set up this thing called the Veterans Advisory Commission under his office. He's not a veteran, it's under his office. He kept everything very tight under his office. And we found out about it, and we just shook it loose. We filed a lawsuit. We was able to, we won on appeal, and they had to establish an Office of Veterans Affairs with a Director of Veterans Affairs. They did so shortly after we won the lawsuit, but since that time, there's no longer a Director of Veterans Affairs in the city of Philadelphia. Right now, the only Veterans Affairs, the Veterans Affairs is only identified by the name on the front of the door. As it stands now, that since the last military veteran left, there's no one in that office that's been trained in terms of Veterans Affairs. And so I decided to say, look, what I'm going to do, I can't live my life chasing these folks down. I don't have the resources to do that. I'm just going to make that a part of my book. That's what I'm doing now. I got to tell the story. I got all the facts. I got the receipts. I got the court case. And so I'm going to tell it.
So I'm curious about how your ideas about the United States and its role in the world have changed or evolved, particularly since 9/11. What are your thoughts about American war today?
Well, look, I don't support war, period, today. You know, I was 19 when I participated in it, pretty much uh, forced to go, that or jail. I'm unlike Muhammad Ali, in which I got a big picture on my wall of him. I didn't have the resources to do that. And as many of us didn't have the resources. All we had to do was accept the draft or go to jail. And most of us did probably the right thing at that time for us. Go and do your term of military service. And I did honorably and with distinction and decorations.
In the past, particularly before Vietnam, black people saw the military service as a path toward equality, racial equality in the
Yes,
United
absolutely.
States today. Has that changed in your mind?
No, it's still there. It's an avenue. Parents still want the best for their children. They see a great opportunity to get a child experience in life and go out and make something, do something for themselves. And they see that the military is a good way to go. And I agree because we don't have any type of those type of structures in our communities per se, in our specific communities. And so it's all if you're living in the country, then you're paying taxes. You have some obligations as a citizen, and one for any man or woman now over 18 is the military. You have an option to do it. If you call upon, you must go, and you must report, as the letter would say.
What advice would you give to people who are serving in the military today or who have served and are trying to reintegrate into civilian society?
First and foremost, maintain or protect, learn about your peoplehood. I say learn, not saying that they don't know, but so much has been destroyed about our peoplehood here in America, about who we are as a people, as African people. So our first thing to do, learn about your peoplehood, your origins, and the capacity of your people and all that your people have brought to the world. I'm not talking about just the United States, but to the world. And with that, that should give you enough um, background support to actually engage the powers that be, the institutions that continue to promote these relationships that grew out of enslavement. And so you're always dealing with those agencies, you're always dealing with the right of recognition of who you are as a people. There's the issue right now. The legal issue is that there's no there's no group who can be identified in a group, an identifiable group that can come before the court and claim their reparations. I say that's not the case at all. I say it, and that's why 4 years ago we identified descendants of Africans enslaved in the United States. I'm not responsible for your illegality enslaving me, taking the whole, destroying my family history and all that. Now, if you want me to prove that aspect, that linkage, then you got to give me the resources to prove it. Because right now, I don't have we as a people don't have the resources to do it unless the money comes from Congress. And they did set up the HR 40 Commission, but still, that's just an investigative proposal which has yet to start, right? And so once it begins, then that's formed that proposal or that investigation will create the basis for specific dates and times and places and people to demand their reparations right now, and from being enslaved here in the United States. So I'm a descendant of African enslaved in the United States. That's how I identify myself, and that's the reparations definition of who I am.
Have you been able to trace your heritage back to specific people, or has that history been lost?
Well, I have the family. We have our family book thanks to my beautiful niece, and we can go all the way back to our great grandparents, right? And so it's more to be done, even in that respect. But yes, it's a cost to do that. Why should the enslaved pay for finding out what happened to them, to their families, and to their grandparents, their mother's mother's mother, and their father's father's father? Why have to pay for that? That it should be a part of the reparation process. It must be, in fact, if to be truly to reestablish our peoplehood as a people that no other people have had that experience here in the United States but us. And the Congress, state legislators, systems have tried to define that away. But we say no, this is the group here. And it was your behavior that destroyed records of who we are. And the refusal to acknowledge your wrongfulness, your crime against humanity. It was a crime against humanity. They did it. They took, they just whipped it out of us. They just enslaved it out of us, of who we are. And so now you see, like I have my African garb on because I'm still searching and want to represent who I am. I'm African. And everything else follows that. Right? And so I'm gonna lift that up because that's part of the history and peoplehood that has been destroyed for my people.
I teach a lot of young people. Last fall, I taught African American history since 1865. Last spring, I taught the Vietnam War. I deal with a lot of young people, and most young people, in my opinion, are highly motivated.
Yes.
They're awakening to inequality, and they're fighting against injustice, and a lot of them are going to law school, and they're serving in their communities, and they're going back to their
Oh
communities, and they're
yes.
bringing all
Oh
this
yes.
knowledge to the forefront of these fights for equality. What message would you like to give to them? If you were speaking directly to my students, what would you want them to know?
Well, I like to do that, but I first want to acknowledge all the people who have kept the reparations movement in the public domain over the last uh 100. Let's just do 100 years, okay? But really, it's really no more than 54 years or 56 years that slavery was officially abolished, right? So-called in law. But that was 56 years ago. That was like yesterday. So slavery was not long ago, right? It's generational. And so what we try to do is put young students into that generational timeline of what happened to us, you see? Then we're able to do that, and we have some PowerPoint presentations, some trainings that we do. If they receive that, then they have the basis to go forward and move forward the reparations agenda here in the United States. And they don't have to try and fight reparations all over the world. I don't support that. You fight for reparations where your feet are. If you're in the United States, you fight for reparations there. If you're in Britain, you fight for reparations in Britain. You're fighting in Jamaica, you fight there in Jamaica. Because then you have that whole capacity, that worldwide effort bubbling up and engaging the descendant enslavers to be able to get them more in line of what they can do with a true heart, a true mind, and facts and circumstances that are true. So we will have to just continue to push the agenda, and say that it's not over until we say it's over, and it must be negotiated. You just can't hand me a check. You just can't give me a grant. That's not reparations. Reparations must be negotiated with the representatives of those people who've been enslaved, and I'm one of them. And I'm going to negotiate the deal. I'm going to try and do it any way I possibly can do it. And I always will be commanding reparations for people of African descent here in the United States. And I've written a lot of stuff about it, and so anytime you might want to look at some of that, you can. A lot of it's still online, and but I'll make it available to you, just because it's educational for both sides, for whites and blacks to understand what happened to us. And then it's all up to your mind and your willingness to correct the wrongs that was done. I don't have an army, so I ain't going there. All right, so it's about educating both sides of the issue, both the descendant enslaved, and the descendant enslavers. Like I'm transferring that concept to you right now. because I'm a descendant enslaved, and you're a descendant of the enslavers. All right, so we can admit that. Then let's talk about how we can roll this thing on out to make this country a better country, and to acknowledge that what was done, and as true as we see it, and then go ahead and take our next steps towards living and enjoying this country. Because other than that, we always gonna be at each other's throats in the background, and we have different animosities about each other and all that type of stuff. So there's no real groundwork. There's no garden. There's no garden for the issue of reparations to grow right now, right? Because it takes all those who were involved, take the descendant enslaved, and the descendant enslavers to work this thing through. You see? And it's all about that. It's political, clear political. And so if you have a heart about, if you want to represent your ancestors as being the enslavers, and you know that, and you're not doing anything about that today, then that's an issue for me, right? Do what you can, do what based on your capacity, but of course we know that in order for reparations to really happen, we got to deal with the decision makers in this country, at the local level, state level, and of course Congress. We got to be willing to engage that, and we need more and more people of the descendant enslavers to come on the side, come to the table, represent us, or representing themselves as descendant enslavers. All right, if they do that, then that's respectful to me. All right, and I can talk to you. If you're going to identify yourself like that, because the record shows that that's essentially who you are in the empirical nature of life, and I'm the descendant enslaved, then we can talk how we're going to work that. I'm not giving up. I'm going to negotiate the deal. I always said I'm going to negotiate this here. It's not, nobody can just give me a grant and say go bye, or give me a check and say bye bye. No, you got to negotiate the deal, because the deal with your whole peoplehood structure, more than just a check. Economics, health, politics, wealth, the whole deal. And of course, who you are culturally and as a people. And so we're still rebuilding that. And we got to rebuild it through our practice, and we need resources to rebuild it. And those resources, for me, is defined as reparations from the federal government, state government, and local legislators.
Well, I think we all do what we can. If our heart and our mind is in the right place, obviously not all of the people who look like me are actively trying to promote justice, but
we need to be that part of that repair ball rolling down the hill, that big ball
right.
rolling down the hill, gathering steam, growing folks, more and more people. So we got to talk about it in the public domain.
And from my perspective, I don't think that the conditions and institutions that once enslaved people have changed all that much in the United States today, because I'm curious about your perspective. You were incarcerated really at the brink of the rise of mass incarceration in the United States, with the war on drugs launched by Nixon, escalated by Reagan, and then by Clinton. There were, at the end of his term, there were 2 million Americans in prison. And parole. So, what has that been like for you, from someone who was on the inside, did what he could to organize incarcerated people, and then to get out and to devote your entire life to justice while watching incarceration essentially explode during that time time?
Right. And again, the fact that if I understand what to be true, in fact, what happened to us, and I do, and the fact that it's still going on, then I try to show where it's going on in the disguises that it may be in, right? But more in particular is to show who's in the position to correct the problem, to pay reparations, and that's our federal government, that's Congress, it's our state legislators. But in order, we have to, the people who believe the wrong has been done, a crime against humanity, must join forces. They don't have to be all black folks. Believe me, they don't. They need to be people who know the truth and willing to relate to it and stand behind what happened, and solve that problem once and for all. And a check is not going to do it. It's a repair in terms of education, your health, your culture, the whole deal. You see? And so we always look for people who understand that and be willing to engage the system on the truth that they do understand about what happened to blacks here in the United States. You know, that was, it's more than a notion what happened to us. You know, they raped us, they killed us, they mutilated us, they hung us. I mean, come on. It was total crimes. And there's a very pictorial record of it here in our libraries and whatnot. And so now just for the country to own up to it once and for all, and provide the resources where those descendants of African slaves in the United States can decide exactly how to apply those resources current day to rebuild and repair. We cannot let the federal government, the criminals, to not only provide the money, but also tell us how we should be repaired. That's what's going on right now, and I reject that.
So I'm at the point of the interview where I only have a couple of concluding type questions for you. But are there other things that you want to talk about in this interview, or do you want to reschedule an interview to think about maybe things we possibly missed?
Yes, let's do that. Let's reschedule the next interview, and I'll be prepared to talk about all the things that I pretty much want to get across and communicate to the general public.
Great.
Is that all right?
That's all right with me.
Yeah.
Ari, I want to thank you again for sharing your story with me and for illuminating people to the struggles of Black people in America, your activism around reparations, your support for veterans, your advocacy for criminal justice reform. It's all appreciated. And thank you for talking to me about them.
Well, thanks for stepping up and acknowledging it and being able to engage it and further expose it to the public, the general public. That's the important thing, is to get the word out. I mean, just talking and to each other and meeting and doing protests is not going to solve the problem within the time frame that it need to be solved. But the legislators can do that. So we need help with these legislators at every level, starting from Congress on down. And the various types of executive orders that spoke to reparations is neither here nor there unless the Congress can, in fact, legislate it based on the research that has been already done, the studies that have already been done, and really step forward and put the United States on in the position of making it happen. That they have to respect, acknowledge what happened, what their descendants did, and now it's their responsibility to help repair it. That's how I see it. That's my approach.
I think it's an approach that people should and can get behind. But I want to thank you again, and I'm gonna end the recording now.